What if you could ditch the utility bills, grow your own food, power your house from the sun, and wake up every morning to total freedom?
It's not a fantasy. Actually, our guest today is Ryan Mitchell, and he's someone who has actually done it. And now his passion is to teach others how to get off grid.
So if you want to unplug and reclaim your freedom, you don't want to miss what we're going to talk about today. Hey, Provident Preppers, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Colleen, and today we are going to be diving into one of the most empowering things, and that is self-reliance and taking a step to be off grid.
We're excited to have Ryan Mitchell with us. He is the author of this book, Living Off Grid, 50 Steps to Unplug, Become Self-Sufficient, and Build the Homestead of Your Dreams. This is exciting stuff, and we are so glad to have you here. Thank you for being with us.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to do this crazy thing and go off grid.
Kind of my background was I was coming out of graduate school, right at the time of the Great Recession. And that was obviously like a really tough job market. I was lucky to have a job during that time, but I saw people around me, having a tough time with their homes and finances and stuff like that. And I took it as a moment to reflect and kind of change the trajectory of my life. So I made certain decisions, which one of them was to eventually go and live off grid, to have land, things like that, change up kind of how I approached life. With those decisions, I had to learn a lot of stuff along the way. I found it just fascinating in terms of all the stuff I had to learn and figure out and the lifestyle that went with it. So that's kind of how I got into all the off-grid living stuff.
Very cool. Now, in your book, you talk about 50 steps that you can take as you go down this road. Obviously, we won't be able to cover all that today, but talk about 3 steps that people could get started with.
Yeah, so the book is set up into 50 steps, but what I kind of think about it as is like a kind of choose your own adventure. So there's certain chapters that everyone's going to read, and then from there, they're going to kind of pick and choose, what's important to you. So it might be food production, for example, how to think about growing all your food, or maybe offsetting some of your grocery shopping through food production, whether it's animals or the garden, things like that, preservation, canning, whatever. So, food production would be one. Energy is another. So solar, obviously, when I, went fully off grid, I was on solar basically. I lived on that for almost a decade. So, energy is a key one there. And then also I'll say lifestyle design, thinking critically about what you want to, your life to be like. What is it going to look like? What is it going to be like when you wake up and go about your day? Thinking about those kinds of things in the context of living off grid.
There are a lot of romantic ideas about going off grid.
Yes.
What I'd like to know is, what was one of your biggest surprises or challenges that you hadn't anticipated?
One of the big surprises was, even though the technology is not perfect, how refined it is, and how if you design your home or your setup kind of from the base, from square one, how it can be pretty practical and even somewhat affordable. Getting into it, I thought it was going to be a lot harder actually than it was. And there were certainly days that I was questioning that thing. There was typically in my area, January, February is the most difficult time for solar because the days are short. It's very cloudy. It's cold. So you're running your heat a lot, things like that. There was 1 or 2 days kind of over the whole 10 years that I was just wanted to throw in the towel. But, then I realized now I don't live off grid on 100% solar now. And so a surprise there was oh yeah, people pay power bills. And I hadn't paid a power bill in a decade. And that was kind of an adjustment, getting used to that again. So yeah, those were some of the surprises.
Now, one of the key aspects of this is finding the right piece of land. I mean, assuming that somebody's going to move off, they're going to find a place to live. And it looks like you did a great job. You probably learned some things in the process. Tell us about that and maybe some of the pitfalls that people need to avoid.
So I've found over kind of my journey, there was 3 times that I had to find land. The first 2 were basically like renting from friends that I knew, kind of connections that I built. And the last one was actually a purchase. A little bit different context, but I had to find each one of those. And land is such a important, step for most people. Like when they think about going off grid, when they think about building a homestead, step 1 usually is get some land. It's a romantic notion in some cases. It's also really challenging today, right? Land is not cheap. They're not making any more of it, right? The price is just going up, but it's also kind of key to kind of getting started. In the book, what I do talk about is also starting where you're at today, right? Like don't delay your dreams and your learning curve for this future of a perfect 100-acre homestead in the middle of the woods and things like that. So I definitely encourage people to start today where you're at. But in terms of finding land, know that it's going to be challenging. And I think the biggest piece of advice that I learned in my journey, especially on the purchase side, was getting really, really clear on what is important to you and what does that land need to actually be and do for you when you kind of make your wish list, if you will, when you go shopping, and the criteria that you're going to evaluate land. And there's a couple of key pitfalls that I try to steer people to not fall into in making a bad decision when it comes to purchasing land. I mean, if you like, we could double click more into what like my kind of criteria and that journey that I figured out along the way. But that was like the biggest, getting super clear on what you were looking for and what it needed to do, and what your deal breakers were for that land.
And that's, I think, a critical aspect here. And it just kind of clicked in my brain that not everybody's going to have the same design or dream, what this should look like, what it should do, how it should function. And so, I had this picture in my head. Okay, somebody wants to go off grid, but they choose a very heavily wooded piece of land that's going to be hard to clear and get a place for solar and maybe wind or whatever they choose. I think you'd kind of nailed it there, is you really have to decide upfront, what is it your goals are? What do you want this to do? And then start looking.
And yet I did notice in the book that you had certain goals at the beginning and then your list changed.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought that was really good because we have to be able to pivot. It's kind of like, before you're a parent, you have all these ideas about how to raise kids. And after you raise kids, you're like, I don't know anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So like when I first started, I had in my mind that I needed 20 acres. And I don't know why or where that number came from. And I think that was part of the problem. It was kind of arbitrary. But then when I started looking and I saw the prices of what 20 acres cost, realistically, I was like, oh, okay, well, I either need to somehow come up with a lot more money, or I need to kind of get realistic about what I actually need. So then I sat down, did the work, and what I realized was what I actually needed instead of wanted or just kind of chose arbitrarily was I needed 3 good acres versus 20 just generic acres. And I kind of defined what a good acre for me was. And with that, I shaved hundreds of $1,000s off the price tag, right there, while not actually sacrificing anything of what my vision was. So that clarity and that definition saved a lot of money, made it a lot more practical, opened up the market. And, if I found some acreage that was larger than 3 acres, all the better. Where I ended up, it's 11.5 acres. So that's kind of the case that would be. But yeah, 3 good acres was kind of where I had that pivot in that process.
Let's pivot and let's talk a little bit about power. Tell us about some rookie mistakes that we should avoid when we're trying to go off grid.
So the advice that I give people often when it comes to thinking about going solar, especially if they want to live, 100% off grid or take a serious stab at it, is design your system and all your components for the worst day, not for your best day, because people, they're thinking about it usually in, I don't know why, but like in the summer months when it's really sunny and nice out and, there's lots of sun, the days are really long. That's the easy part, designing for those summer months in my location. like I mentioned before, in the winter, when the days are short, you're using a lot of power for different things in the home. In my area, it's not uncommon for us to have weeks of just overcast skies, and that just really kills your solar exposure. That's kind of advice number one, is design for your worst day so that every other day is going to be just easy at that point. The second one is don't be afraid to have, specifically propane is the one I kind of point to. Think about that as part of the mix. It's not going to be your main line of power, but it's there for your backups, because some people want to do everything off of solar, but then you start to actually add up what it takes to do certain things, like heat your hot water or cook or heat your house. Propane can be a really affordable, easy way to kind of implement that and achieve those things while reducing your array and all the things that go with it, your batteries, things like that. So when I did my home, I had my hot water and my stovetop was propane. Everything else was electric. And I still had to have a pretty big solar panel system to do the heating and cooling. But I did want electric heating and cooling, which is a challenge. That's, on a traditional size home, you need a very large array. On the small home that I was in, didn't need it as big, but it still wasn't cheap. That's for sure. Don't shy away from thinking about, okay, solar being my main line, but I maybe supplement with wood, fireplace, propane, natural gas, things like that. And then kind of the third thing that if I could do it all over again, is I would work in automatic backup generator, so that on those days that it is really cloudy and I don't have a lot of power coming in, that can kick in and close the gap, so that I don't have to deal with it. And it's the auto start. A lot of the nicer inverters now will actually notice your batteries are low, notice you're not getting enough power from your solar. It says, okay, we're going to turn on the generator for 15 minutes, get us back up to 100% or whatever it is. And you don't have to think about it. Where the way I did it is I had a generator for those times, but I had to manually start it. It wasn't as nice. It's like a portable generator. Inevitably, the carburetor would get clogged. I was out there kind of messing with it at the worst time when there's no power. I couldn't see anything. Of course, it was always raining on those days. And yeah, so that would be the third thing that I would suggest is strongly consider having an auto start backup generator for your system that you won't need often, right? If you design your system, but it's those, you count on your hand the number of times, but it'll just be really convenient. And inevitably those days are like Christmas dinner, right? Or something like that.
Yeah.
When you got a turkey in the oven or something like that, you just you don't want to lose power those days. That makes it what normally is a very convenient lifestyle, just seals the deal. It makes it, really positive overall.
Speaking of these kinds of things, you've dealt with dead batteries. You've dealt with a generator that's given you problem, frozen pipes. I'm sure you've had some moments where you said, what in the heck did I do? And how did you deal with that?
It's the ups and downs. And I think with kind of living off grid, we talk a lot about resiliency, right? And self-sufficiency. And we get into that in the book a fair bit, but it's important to develop that mentality of resiliency and that you're going to have to figure it out, that it's up to you, right? Because that's the whole crux of this, right? Being self-reliant means you're reliant on yourself. So we're not going to be a fair weather self-reliance person, right? We need to be self-reliant on those dark days, those tough days. So I think just developing that mentality. And then what's nice about kind of this lifestyle is it's not, for the faint of heart. It takes some sweat equity. You got to build all these things. You got to figure it all out. You got to troubleshoot the stuff. You got to assemble the things. So along the way, you learn just a really good set of skills. I would have never had to know this level of electrical kind of knowledge and experience if I was just living off grid, right? Because I just go over to the switch, I flip it and I expect it to be on. And if it doesn't, someone somewhere, it's their problem, not mine.
Right.
When I go to my off-grid house and I flip the switch, there's no one to call. It's like, okay, I got to go fix this now. So yeah, you learn a lot of those skills. So there's times where it's just inconvenient living off grid, but designing the system kind of kept those to a minimum. So I never really had a time where I would just like wanted to throw into the towel. It was always just like, okay, well, this is a challenge. We got to figure this out, knock it down, move on. That's kind of how I had to think about it. Overall positive throughout the experience.
And probably a huge confidence booster as you learn all these things and you have these experiences and you hit these problems and you solve them. Like you said, you just have to be resilient. But whatever comes, I can figure it out. I can solve the problem and be okay.
Yeah, it definitely is, because I built my home from scratch. I had never done it before. I was a white collar worker. I had no business building a house, honestly. I went to a lot of YouTube University, watched a lot of videos, read a lot of books, and built my own home. Got my merit badge in all the trades. And then, solar was one, composting toilets was another, off-grid internet, you name it. Like, it's just a long list of things. So yeah, you get a deep education, and it does give you a lot of confidence in things you can do, for sure.
So mentioning composting toilets, maybe we should talk water. Water is hugely important for all of us, especially as farmers. That's something that we're really concerned about. So tell us a little bit about your setup. And are you living without a well?
So where I was off grid, I was lucky. I was on 20 acres of like this nice woodland, but it was actually within a city limit. So the city doesn't allow wells. You have to connect to their water line. And so when I was there, I was on a city water because you were required to by law, and they wouldn't ever grant well permits. Where I am at now, we now have a well and things like that. So I've gone through that process, and I like being on a well a lot better. It's very expensive to be on city grid. Just for example, the permit to have the luxury of connecting to their water system there was $11,000 just to tap onto it. And all that is for them to come in and put the meter on the line so that they can charge you. You then have to connect it to your house, however far that is. So yeah, just out of the get-go, that was $11,000 for really just the machine that they're going to charge you for monthly. Compared to here, my well was $14,000, right? So, but then I never have a water bill the rest of my life,
Remind us what area you live in.
I'm in North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and that's kind of the case with everything. So water permits are going up. The cost of building is going up. So if you're off the grid and you're able in an area that you're able to do, which is also a consideration to think about when you're looking for land, it's like, where do you want to be? What does the legal situation look like? Yeah. So water is something that I see off-grid homesteaders sometimes, they try to put it off because it is expensive, right? Like $14,000 for my well here. That's not trivial. That's a chunk of change. And it was also like very stressful because you're just watching this guy drill with this big machine, and you just see dollars as it goes lower and lower and lower, and you're just hoping for water, and you never know, right? Like my neighbor's was 300 feet, and we got some water around 300 feet, and then we ended up going down to 500, and then that's when we got a good flow. And I was just of the whole project, that was the one thing that kind of gave me the most grief and heartburn in the process. But I always encourage people to take their water access very seriously. If you're going to live off grid, don't rely on hauling in water. Don't rely on rain catchment, things like that. Those are great things to supplement or get you over the hump until you get the well. But make sure that when you're purchasing a land that you can get a well permit, that's realistic, that you're going to hit water. Because the number one thing that I see people fail on when they go to homesteaders, become a homesteader off grid, is they don't have access to clean quality water without a lot of headache, right? When you can turn on your faucet and clean drinkable water comes out, that's when you'll have success. And every single failure case I've seen was always someone that was just like, I can't go back into town and haul another 600 gallons of water or whatever it is. So that's water is key. I mean, I think we all know that intuitively, but it really is kind of a marker of success or failure for off-grid folks.
Yeah, great wisdom there. So talk to us a little bit about what you're growing on your homestead. What are you growing, raising? Do you do preserving and other things to take that harvest and make it useful long-term?
Yeah. So obviously we have a garden right now. Since I've just moved here, we don't have any animals yet, but that is definitely in the plan. So I've had chickens and quail were kind of like my two big ones that I had the most interest in. Bees as well. And then in the book, I talk a little bit about, when you're thinking about the lifestyle, think carefully about the animals that you bring on and choose to raise on your homestead, because they will be one of the bigger determining factors of what your lifestyle is going to look like, right? If you have, let's say, a milking goat that needs to be, in some cases, milked, morning and night, twice a day, every single day, or it goes off milk, that means you have to be at your homestead twice a day, every single day. It means that you don't really get to do vacations, meaning that you can't just like go off for a little bit if you have to go for work or if you need to go see family or something like that. It may mean that, if you have a long drive to the big city, you might have to rush back and things like that. So for me personally, where I kind of stop the line is any animal that I can't leave for a long weekend, is kind of my personal threshold because of the lifestyle that I would like to lead. I love the idea of like raising a cow and then harvesting that cow for my own meat and stocking my freezer with it. But practically, it's just not going to be something that I want to have for my lifestyle. The alternative might be, and this is why I encourage people in the book, is like, okay, if that isn't right for you or isn't in the cards for you at this current moment, think about working with a local rancher, purchasing a half a cow, something like that. So you can still have some of those benefits without necessarily the lifestyle that goes with it. And then maybe it's in the cards later or something like that. So growing food and then the animals is a consideration. And then, like you mentioned, preservation. My main thing is canning. I have like a Presto electric canner. I've done the big pots and things like that. And the convenience of those, they can't hold as much as I'd like, but they just kind of, it's dummy proof, as much as it can be.
I've been going back and forth about whether or not to get those because I've always done the traditional. So I've looked at it and like, oh, do I really want to sink 350 or whatever into this? But you really like it?
I do. Yeah. Because you put it in, it'll sanitize your jars for you, and then it'll keep them hot until you're ready to fill them. Then once you actually fill them, you put them in, and then it does the canning process for you. And it's as set it as and forget it as I can. Like everyone's busy today, right? And I would love to sit here and like hand knead sourdough loaves until whatever, and like can, like with a whole pantry full of cans at once. But realistically, like, I have a job, I have, responsibilities, I got lots of things. Modern life is busy. I find it to be a useful tool in my tool belt to do canning when I probably wouldn't otherwise. So, and I think that's a win, right? And so that's kind of how I look at it is, yes, it's expensive. You make that one-time investment, but then I can do smaller batch canning too. So if I just have a little bit, it's just a lot easier too.
Thanks for the tip. And it's the Presto you chose, right? There were a couple of them I was looking at.
Yeah, the Presto one. I think I did a lot of research into it, and it seemed like that was the most reputable and like consistent and safe canner out there. So I'm sure I don't know others too well, but that's one I went with.
I might have to get one for this fall.
Yeah.
All right. So our viewers, a lot of them live in suburban areas and apartments. If they are trying to transition a little bit to this lifestyle, but they can't quite leave, what are some things that you would recommend that they start incorporating into their day-to-day life that might help them with that transition?
I think it's really important for you to start where you're at, because what that means is you can start today. And that's, I find really empowering, right? And it's, the temptation is to like get to a perfect place and then start. And the truth is you'll never get to perfect, right? Like,
Yeah.
and you could wait a very long time for that. Think about, again, what kind of lifestyle do you want? What are some of the things that you're going to choose to do? And maybe start with one thing that, one aspect, whether it's food production or, preservation, or maybe a few chickens. Like, just choose one small thing, start there, learn that skill, right? And so then you have that skill that you can kind of build off of. And so it may be that you're doing that, like, let's say raising chickens on your little suburban homestead, and that's all you ever do. But if you ever do go to a larger piece of land, well, now you have that skill set, that deep experience to build off of when you maybe go to 50 chickens or whatever it is, right? So yeah, start with one thing. Gardening is like a really obvious one for me. It could be container gardening. If you just have like, a city apartment and you have a little balcony, you could have a small raised bed. I always encourage people to like start small. I used to run a community garden, and we'd have these new gardeners come in with like all these grand ideas, and they were just super excited, and they wanted, hundreds of square feet. And I was like, whoa. Let's see how you feel when it's August and it's 98 degrees and humid and the weeds are just coming in full force, right? Let's start with a 4x8 bed. So that's kind of what I usually suggest is, for food, start with the 4x8 bed and grow maybe 2 or 3 of your favorite foods. And that would be another tip, is making sure you're growing things that you actually like, not what you think a gardener should grow. Another kind of option for suburbanites or even urbanites is, small solar generators. It's not going to replace your power bill, but what it does kind of let you do is learn the process a little bit, understand the parts that go into it. You'll then also get a kind of a feel like, okay, well, this is, a 400 watt panel, right? With a, X number of, size battery. And you learn like, oh, okay, that can run my laptop and my cell phone for about this long. And you start to get a realistic understanding, and you'll be able to intuit like things a little bit better when it comes to solar. Or maybe eventually when you do go full off grid with a large scale, solar panel system. And there's just a lot of benefits of, resiliency if the power goes out, disaster preparedness, things like that. Having a little solar generator to kind of tinker with and learn on. So that's another one. And then if you want to try some canning, you don't necessarily have to grow it. You could go to the farmer's market and buy, what, like a larger bundle of whatever it is. Sometimes I'll go to the farmer's market at the end, and you'll find a farmer who has a whole bunch of green beans, let's just say, and you'd be like, hey, how much for everything you got? And he'd be like, he gives you a good price because he doesn't want to haul it home. It's probably going to go bad here in a couple of days. And so, okay, we're canning green beans now. And that's how I kind of do that. So those are 3 examples of how maybe a suburban person might dip their toe into this and start to build some skills there.
So this lifestyle seems to give you more freedom. Tell us about the freedom that you feel having done what you've done.
I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I think what it ultimately let me do is kind of change, well, 2 things. One, be more resilient, so that like you feel better, you sleep better at night, you're more confident if something goes wrong, like if you're in a pinch, it's just not as scary, right? So I think that has a lot of benefits in its own right. Like, life can get complicated. It has its ups and downs. And if you're just a more capable human, then it's just not going to be as bad. But then on the kind of financial side of the lifestyle, there you can live very frugally, very affordably. Like I mentioned, being on solar, I didn't have a power bill for a decade. I remember before moving in to like my off-grid home that I built and all that, my rent was rent and utilities and like some insurance stuff mixed in there, was about $1,500 a month is what it cost me where I was. And then when I moved in to my tiny home that was off grid, and I'll cop to, it was a tiny home. So like, this is going to be a smaller budget, but my monthly bills were $15, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
$1,500 to $15, right? Now I could go work a 1-hour shift at McDonald's and make $15, I think is kind of going right now in my area, at least. So I could work 1 hour at McDonald's if I had to in a pinch to cover my costs. And, obviously I need some food, but hopefully I'm growing some of my own food, things like that. So the financial landscape there just changed dramatically. So it meant that I could save more. I paid off my student loans 15 years early, I think it was. I paid for my next car in cash. I got to travel a bunch. I did all that. All those things would have never been possible if I was in a traditional home with traditional bills. And then, just quality of life, I guess you could kind of say, just went up. It just, when you're out of the rat race a little bit more than, like some people, life's a little slower when you're in the garden.
Beautiful
Makes a little
garden.
more sense, right? Yeah. So there's like a health wellness aspect to it as well. You're eating better food, obviously, than some people who are going to McDonald's, let's just say, for all their meals. So yeah, those are the kind of three things of the lifestyle that's changed.
So we are huge into community, and we think community is really important. Tell us the role that community plays when you are living off grid.
You can't do it all, especially in the beginning, right? You're going to have to learn a lot. You're going to make mistakes, and there are going to be things that you choose to kind of do and things that you don't. A good example is raising cattle, right? I don't want to raise a 1,500-pound cow and have a barn and the hay and all that kind of stuff and whatnot. But what I can do is, patronize a local rancher, build that relationship. There's a good case to be made for specialization, right? Like, so the rancher, that's all he does. The greens farmer who makes just like really great lettuces and things like that. You figuring out what your little niche is, and then you can kind of connect with people. You learn from them along the way. You find resources that you need, and you get all the things that you do need. And in an ideal world, maybe you even barter all of that, right? So we're not dealing with the money and the taxes, and I have a surplus here. Oh, you have some surplus there. Let's just swap, kind of thing. And all that is built off the back of relationships and community. And it can be difficult when you move into a new community to kind of find those people, because most people don't live off grid. Or if you do, you're a little weird, right? Like in the grand scheme of things, right? And weird in a good way, right? I should say.
Oh, yeah.
And,
I love
absolutely. So you need to find weirdos like you, and we're not hanging around at the coffee shop necessarily, because we're rolling up our sleeves and getting stuff done on our homesteads. So we're busy people. So it can be difficult sometimes to find those folks. But slowly over time, you bump into the people. In the book, I talk about like places to kind of connect with other folks that are like-minded. And, slowly you build up a network of friends and, people that you trade with or do business with, things like that.
Community is just so beautiful, because you're right. We can't do everything, but we can combine our efforts with other people and everybody wins. It's just such an amazing thing. Let's wrap things up here a little bit. Tell us just maybe one or two things that maybe you would do differently if you were starting over again.
Well, I mentioned the auto start generator. If you're on solar, I think that's a key one. So that would be kind of the power side. I think doing it all over again, I wish I could have figured out a way to get to owning the land a little bit faster. I'm not sure it was necessarily in the cards for me financially because I wanted to buy the land cash, and I was able to do that. And a lot of homesteaders want to do that as well. But there was a moment where I realized, like, oh, okay, I'm making good progress with saving money for this land purchase, but then the cost of that land was also increasing. So I was basically treading water. I wasn't making as much progress as I felt like I was, because let's just say I saved $1,000. Well, that land went up $1,500, right? So there was a moment where I was like, oh, okay, I really need to do this and get into it now. And I was, really wanted to do that cash. So I ended up doing a loan for a little bit on the land, and then I was able to get into it. And in a few years, I paid it off. But in that time of me just paying off, the land went up in value $50,000. So it's just like, it's incredible. Land is so expensive. So
Yeah.
I don't know that I have like wise words or wisdom there, but like, think about your savings rate. Think about what the rate of land is doing. Think about ways that you can bring in extra income to get to that point as quickly as possible. Because once you get the land, you own it. It's like planting a flag in the ground, and it just really enables a lot of, next steps, but also just financial health too, because it is a growing asset, and it is worth the money you put into it and all that kind of stuff. So that would be maybe something I would do differently next time. Hopefully not next time. Hopefully this is it, right? I think maybe leaning on my network and connections a little bit more to find that land, because I spent a lot of time looking at listings, and those were usually very, very expensive. And then where I found this property was a friend of a friend on Facebook. Yeah. And she just, my neighbor's selling, and come to find out that the land had been listed for a long time, but the agent, I don't know, didn't get around to it or forgot to actually put it on Zillow, and they only had it listed on their website. So no one could find it except this connection that I had. So that was how I found this land. And the previous piece of land that I rented was also through a connection. It was kind of a social group, like an off-grid social group that I was part of in the city. And I met a guy there, and we hit it off. And then a couple years later, I was like, hey, I think I remember you having some land. Would you be willing to rent it? He's like, yeah, that'd be great. And so that's how I found that. So every single piece of, actually all the pieces of land was through a personal connection, through a friend of a friend of a friend or something like that. And none of it was through your traditional listings. So that would be something that if I had to do again, I would go straight there first.
Thank you, Ryan. This is his book, Living Off Grid. We will leave a link for your book down in the description of this video, but is there anything else that our audience needs to know about contacting you?
I mean, we'll have like you said, the details in the description. The book's coming out September 4th. And if you want to find me, my website is thetinylife.com, where we talk about simple living in, ways like tiny houses, minimalism, homesteading, off-grid living, things like that. So that's kind of like my home base if you want to find more.
All right. Thank you. It's been awesome chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, we've loved having you on, and I'm reading your book. I'm stealing it from my wife. And now for our audience, the question of the day: what would living off-grid look like for you, and how would that change your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. And thanks for being part of the solution.